first up, The Atlantic just released a major investigative piece that proves that popular large language models like Meta's LLaMA have been using pirated books to train their models. Now, this is something that has been alleged by many different authors in several different lawsuits against AI companies, but it looks like we now have proof that this has been happening. So the article says, quote, upwards of 170,000 books, the majority published in the last 20 years, are in LLaMA's training data. The books are part of a data set called Books 3, and its use has not been limited to LLaMA. Books 3 was also used to train Bloomberg's Bloomberg GPT, Eleuther AI's GPT-J, which is a popular open source model, and likely other generative AI programs now embedded in websites across the internet. What's really fascinating is they also interviewed the creator of this Books 3 data set of pirated books. And it appears, at least according to the founder, that Books 3 was created with altruistic intentions. So they interviewed the independent developer named Shawn Presser who created this data set, and he said he created it to give independent developers, quote, OpenAI-grade training data. He's afraid that large AI companies are going to develop a monopoly over generative AI tools. So he says he created the data set in order to give the little guy ways to train their own Gen AI tools. Now, obviously, this doesn't alleviate the concern that these hundreds of thousands of books are under copyright claims. So, Paul, as we've dive more into this topic, do these revelations materially impact the copyright concerns and the lawsuits being currently levied by authors against these major AI companies?
I don't know. I mean, the journalist who did this, it was quite an impressive feat of investigative journalism. So if you haven't read the article, to read how the author did this, like the lengths they had to go to discover what books were in there, because what you realize is that they either went to great lengths to hide the fact that these books were there, or somehow the way that these things are generated into the data set stripped out a bunch of identifying information. But he had to go through this very specific process to actually compile this list and figure out which books were in there, which authors were in there. Again, either by design or by accident, it was made to appear as though it was covered up how this was done. So pretty crazy story, even just the investigative journalism side of this. There was a quote in there, though, to talk about the copyright side. Rebecca Tushnet, a law professor at Harvard, stated that the law is unsettled when it comes to fair use involving unauthorized material, with previous cases giving little indication of how a judge might rule in the future. So the article wasn't about like this is going to sway one way or the other. It was really just presenting data and facts and kind of addressing the fact that we just don't know. And the key argument a lot of the companies are going to make is the fair use argument, from my understanding of it. And it doesn't seem like it's clear whether that'll be a justifiable argument or not. But again, it's just weird that the companies seem to have gone to such great lengths to not disclose that they used this data. They know they used it. And if they felt okay about it morally and ethically, I don't think they would have hidden it so much. But the other thing that came to mind for me when I was reading this was like, you and I have talked about this before. Like if GPT-4 and LLaMA and Claude and all these models train on just the internet, they go and consume all this content, all of our, marketing branded content, our company's blogs. They go and consume Wikipedia and CNN and all these sources. But there's a bunch of really junky content on the internet too. So maybe it's reading stuff on Reddit that isn't well written, or it's reading all these sources. And if you think about like all this text on the internet, the average of it probably isn't that great. Like there's probably a lot of subpar writing on the internet. So how did it learn to write so well? And so if you start thinking about the fact that, some of these models obviously fed it really well done books. And then if you're developing the models and you're weighting professionally published books heavier than you are Reddit community boards, it starts to make sense where you train these models to write like the best of the human writers. And so to do that, you need the best content. And so if you take 170,000 published books, you're going to assume that that training set is above standard for the rest of the content you find on the internet. And it starts to make sense how they could build these things to actually write like the best humans. And I'm not saying GPT-4 used this data. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But it just starts to make more sense how these things learn to be so good at writing.
Where do we even go from here? Like, is it possible to resolve? I mean, like, we've proven 170,000 mostly copyrighted books. There's been many high-profile authors, including people like Stephen King, who are incensed that their books have been used to train these models. There's lawsuits happening right now. The genie's kind of out of the bottle, though, when it comes to the model being trained and out in the wild, right?
I think so. I mean, again, I keep coming back to, it seems like a lot of these models used content that was questionable at best, whether they were allowed to use it. They may claim fair use moving forward, but they seem to be going out of their way to hide whatever it was they used because they either know it was illegal or they think it might have been illegal. So it seems like, if nothing else, people were very, these companies were very aggressive in using stuff that might not have been allowed to be used. And I just think that the future ones won't do that. Like they know they're being watched closely now, and that future laws and regulations may catch up to them. And I think the play moving forward is to just try and license the stuff. So we talked in past episodes about the licensing issues with the New York Times, and OpenAI is trying to negotiate with them. Google already has. The same thing I was saying before. Like, imagine if you can tune these models to heavily weight examples of content from the New York Times. It's exceptional writing. These are professional journalists. So if your models learn to write like the authors of the New York Times, it's going to be better than just teaching it on some general content on the internet, like corporate blogs and stuff, for example. So I assume that the play moving forward is to try and license with the best examples of writing possible, including books, I would imagine, and then to train them, in a more ethically responsible way moving forward. So I don't know, though. Like, I mean, I just kind of assume this article is probably going to pop up in a lawsuit somewhere as a reference of, we know what you did, and here's the examples of what you did. So I don't know. It's just a space that's going to be so fascinating to watch. We're not IP attorneys. We've said this a million times. But I've even put stuff like this up on LinkedIn, and people who are IP attorneys will comment on it. And they offer wonderful insights, but it's really clear still that no one knows how these cases will play out. It may have just depend on which kind of judges rule on the case. I don't know.
So I'm curious, with you being an author yourself, like, how do you feel about the tension here between the fact that, these data sets have created useful generative AI tools that we all use, but also the fact that your books are probably part of it?
I honestly don't know how I feel personally about this. Is this one of those topics where we just comment on it and I don't step back and say, like, what would I actually be upset? Because someone did ask me on LinkedIn, was your book in it? It's like, I have no idea if my book was in it or not, or any of my books, or either of your books. Like, I don't know. And I don't know that I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, honestly, at this point. Probably because I haven't studied the law enough to know if fair use is a viable argument here, or if it's going to be upheld as a viable argument. So I don't want to take the easy way out here, but I actually don't have a strong feeling one way or the other right now on this. I'm more observing it and very curious about how this plays out.